Welcome to this session on the encounter with the shadow. Today we will delve into what we call the shadow, referring to everything that we repress on an emotional, mental, and sensorial level. It is what we do not allow ourselves to be, and which remains housed in an important part of our unconscious. This shadow can be dark, loaded with emotions that we label as negative, such as fear, anger, or sadness. But there is also a luminous shadow, which includes positive emotions such as love and joy, which we can also repress depending on our personal experiences. In this process of personal development, whose objective is to reach a state of greater internal balance, it is essential to learn to reconcile ourselves with our shadow. This represents that hidden part of ourselves that we tend to run away from, but whose recognition is key if we want to grow in an integral and authentic way. Throughout life, we have rejected, consciously or not, parts of our being that were uncomfortable or painful to us. In doing so, we have built a mask that we use to present ourselves to others, and over time we have come to believe that this mask is our real identity. However, outside of the theater, masks are not only ineffective, but they make us live in a state of falsehood with a high cost of energy to maintain them. This process leads us to live in an incomplete way. Therefore, to move towards a full and fulfilled life, it is essential to recover and integrate those parts that we have left in the shadows in order to find our true essence. Recognizing our shadow is a process that can be uncomfortable and challenging. We spend years projecting onto others what we don't want to see in ourselves, without realizing that we condemn in others what is actually part of our own internal conflicts. As long as we are not aware of our shadow, we live in ignorance of our own internal processes. Not recognizing it is like choosing to remain in the dark. It is difficult to accept that what bothers us most in other people is often a reflection of something that is also within us. If we are not able to see this, we will tend to create enemies. However, when we can recognize our shadow, we deactivate that emotional charge and open ourselves to a new type of relationship, one based on neutrality and the absence of judgment. This is in line with the words of Jesus. How is it that you see the speck in your brother's eye and do not notice the log that is in your own eye? First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will be able to see to take the speck out of your brother's eye. The rejection of our shadow prevents us from achieving unity with ourselves, limits our ability to love others, and hinders a deep encounter with the divine. To illustrate how the shadow works, Carl Jung, one of the pioneers of depth psychology, recounted a dream he had that left a deep mark on him. In his words, "I had a dream that both frightened me and gave me strength. It was nighttime and I was in an unfamiliar place, struggling through a strong wind that blew against me. The fog was thick, covering everything around me. In my hands, I held a small light that threatened to go out at any moment. I knew that everything depended on keeping that light burning. Suddenly, I felt something behind me. Looking back, I saw a gigantic black shadow following me. Despite my fear, I understood that I had to keep going, keeping the light burning at all costs. When I woke up, I realized that that shadow was my own, the part of me that had come to life thanks to the weak light I carried. I also knew that that small light represented my consciousness. Although it was infinitely small and fragile compared to the darkness, it was still my only light. This story invites us to recognize that, although our conscious light is small compared to the vastness of our shadow, it is the key to moving forward and achieving our fullness. In addition to what was mentioned in Jung's dream, we can deduce that the shadow is perceived as a threat because, when it shows itself, it confronts us with the reality that we are not what we appear to be. This generates a feeling of vertigo, since after having invested so much effort in building an acceptable image of ourselves, we suddenly find ourselves questioning those foundations. The shadow becomes a threat especially when we have worked hard to create an idealized image or when we have fed our ego too much, which we have previously discussed in previous sessions. It is common for those who have struggled to build a strong personality or a crystallized identity to encounter greater resistance when recognizing their shadow. This process usually manifests itself most strongly between the ages of 36 and 50, often after a crisis at work, in the family, or in a personal life. An unexpected event causes a shock, and although one desperately tries to maintain an appearance of well-being, it is clear that things will not go back to the way they were before. A practical example of the functioning of the shadow would be the case of a child who has suffered from feeling unimportant in his emotional environment. This pain can be so acute that the child decides to relegate it to the shadow, creating an ego that constantly seeks to be first, to stand out, and to excel above others. He has repressed everything that makes him seem less. When, in his adult life, someone insinuates something that reminds him of this pain of inferiority, he will react vehemently, since he will perceive that his image of importance is being threatened. Without his mask of superiority, he would feel naked and worthless, which is what led him to create that facade in the first place. This cycle perpetuates his ego of feeling superior, continually comparing himself to others and believing that he is above. However, deep down, what he really hides is a deep feeling of inferiority that is very painful. This conflict is only resolved through internal reconciliation, accepting and dialoguing with his insignificant self, learning to integrate it in order to heal and live in greater authenticity. Next, we will discuss how to recognize our shadow in daily life. Psychoanalyst Molly Tooby suggests 6 ways to identify it, which we can observe in everyday situations. 1. Exaggerated feelings about others. Examples such as, "How is it possible that you don't understand?" or "You're hopeless," reveal disproportionate reactions. 2. Negative feedback from those who act as mirrors. Comments such as, "This is the 3rd time you've been late without telling me," can show us repetitive patterns of behavior. 3. Relationships where we generate the same disturbing effect. Phrases such as, "Carla, and I think you haven't been honest with us," reveal constant attitudes that affect several people. 4. Impulsive or inadvertent actions. Sudden comments such as, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean that," reveal unconscious attitudes that arise uncontrollably. 5. Situations where we feel humiliated. Expressions such as, "I'm ashamed of the way you treat me," reflect deep emotions linked to the shadow. 6. Disproportionate anger at the mistakes of others. Statements such as, "You'll never learn," "You're wasting my time," expose frustrations that may be connected to unrecognized aspects of ourselves. We can perceive the shadow when we lose our emotional center or when we are overcome by intense feelings such as anger. However, the shadow usually quickly recedes when we identify it, since its discovery threatens its existence. After reviewing how the shadow is formed and recognized, I propose a practical guide to work with it. First step, identification. It is essential to observe our shadow in various areas of our life, starting with our relationships with others. Pay attention to what you dislike about others, what irritates you or is difficult to tolerate, as well as what you admire intensely. The intensity of your rejection or admiration will reveal the magnitude of your repressed shadow. Questions to reflect on and work on. What exactly bothers me about others? How does that bother me? What is it that I can't stand in others? What do I most like and admire in others? How does that come to be like that? After answering these questions, try to understand how what bothers you in others touches something inside you. Reflect on how you project your own internal conflicts onto others. Change your perspective to a more self-responsible one, recognizing that it is not the other who upsets you, but rather you decide how to react. If it affects you, it is because there is something you need to work on in yourself, rather than trying to change the other. This internal work is a key process to begin to reconcile with your shadow and move towards greater integration and psychological well-being. Another key area to look at our shadow is in relation to self-image. This area encompasses the ways in which we try to project an acceptable version of ourselves to others, and the aspects we inevitably reject in order to sustain that image. To explore this dynamic, a good question to ask ourselves is, what image do I want to give, consciously or unconsciously, and what parts of myself am I rejecting to achieve it? The image we want to show is closely related to our ego, while the aspects we reject are part of our shadow. From an early age, if we suffer any kind of rejection or criticism, we tend to hide certain traits of our personality in an instinctive attempt to protect ourselves and ensure the acceptance of others. When we reach adulthood, it is common to continue using these defense mechanisms, perpetuating the creation of our shadow. Therefore, to unify our identity, it is essential to make those rejected aspects conscious and work on their progressive acceptance. Another important area to explore is our body, since it is through it that the signs of our shadow often manifest themselves. When faced with situations that arouse fear or anxiety, the body usually reacts instinctively, alerting us to the presence of repressed aspects. These reactions are not always due to direct physical threats, but to dangers related to our need for recognition and approval. To delve deeper into this area, we can ask ourselves questions such as, when do I get nervous or feel uneasy? What is it that causes these feelings in me? How do certain situations cause these reactions in me? After exploring your shadow in its various manifestations, I suggest you make a list of the aspects of your black and white shadow to begin to accept them. The black shadow includes those traits that we reject or consider negative, while the white shadow refers to positive qualities that we have repressed or not recognized in ourselves. Finally, as a form of catharsis or emotional release, you can also do a creative activity. Draw your own shadow. This activity can help you visualize and externalize those aspects that you have repressed, facilitating their acceptance and integration into your life.